Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, classmate. So, I'm the first reporter in Group 1. So, our topic is all about Butuan or Limasawa, the site of the first mass in the Philippines. So, Antonio Pigafetta. Antonio Pigafetta was born into wealthy Vicenza family and he studied navigation among the things. He served on the board the galleys of King Knights of Rohides and accompanied the Papal Nuncio Monsignor Sherigati to Spain. Later, he joined the Portuguese captain Ferdinand Magellan and his Spanish crew on their trip to Molucco Island. While in the Philippines, Magellan was killed. While Pigafetta was injured, nevertheless, he recovered, was among only 18 of Magellan's originally crew, who having completed the first circumnavigation of the world, returned to the Spain on board another vessel, the Victoria. Most importantly, Pigafetta kept a journal of his voyage, and this is a key source for information about Magellan's famous journey. So, kini si Antonio Pigafetta, nataw ni siya sa Vicenza, ug nag-study sa navigation, ug nag-serve siya sa mga galleys of King Knights. Iyang mga kauban kay sila Nuncio Monsignor Sherigati didto sa Spain. Pagtuana na, enjoying po siya sa Portuguese ang captain kay si Ferdinand Magellan. Mga nasa mga kauban didto nga taga Spanish. So pagkuan ni Magellan, pag-uli niya sa Philippines kay nakuan siya, namatay na si Pigafetta kay na injured siya. Pero na recover siya sa 18 kabuok nga original nga crew ni Magellan. Then, so Antonio Pigafetta was an Italian scholar, explorer. He joined the expedition to the Space Island led by explorer Ferdinand Magellan under the flag of the Emperor Charles V after Magellan's death in the Philippines island. The subsequent voyage around the world. So Pigafetta nataw dito sa Vicenza, Italy. So namatay si Pigafetta pag 1531 dito ra po sa Vicenza, Italy. That's all. Thank you.
On Pigafetta's account, the first Mass was held on March 31, 1521, Easter Sunday. It was conducted by Father Pedro de Valderrama of Ferdinand Magellan's expedition along the shore of what was referred in the journal of Antonio Pigafetta as Mazwa. Two native chieftains were in attendance, the Raja of Mazwa and the Raja of Butuan. The Raja of Mazwa is Colombo and the Raja of Butuan is Siago. Raja Colombo was the chieftain of Limasawa Island in southern Leyte when the first mass in the Philippines was held. He was part of the social elite of Butuan polity. And Raja Siago was the ruler of Butuan when the first mass in the Philippines was held. After the mass, the party went a little hill and planted a wooden cross upon its summit. And there are two priests work as missionaries and work their account based on second-hand information. And that is Father Francisco Collins and Father Francisco Combis. Their account has strong influence over succeeding historians who quoted their narratives. The site of the first mass was in Butuan, Agusan del Norte, 17th to 19th century.
Collins' account, it is insufficient. So why is it insufficient or not enough? So the first documented Catholic Mass in the Philippines was held on March 31, 1521, Easter Sunday. It was conducted by Father Pedro de Valderrama of Ferdinand Magellan's expedition along the shores of what was referred to in the journals of Antonio Pigafetta. So this site is widely believed by many historians and the government to be Limasawa of the tip of southern Leyte. However, until at least the 19th century, the prevailing belief was the first mass was held in Butuan. This belief is maintained by some who asserts that the first mass was instead held at Masao, Butuan. To the end of the conflict for the issue about the first Mass, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or also known as NHCP, panel adopted that the recommendation unanimously agreed that the evidence and argument presented by the pro-Butuanon advocates are not so efficient and convincing enough to warrant the repeal or reversal of the ruling on the case by National Historical Institute. It is further strengthened by evidence that it was only after 22 years in 1543 when a Spanish expedition led by Ruy Lopez de Villalobos landed in Mindanao. It is valuable as it presented the first Mass celebration to have taken place in Butuan on Easter Sunday of 1521 with the solemn planting of the cross and the formal taking of possession of the island in the name of Crown of Castile. So Colin had obviously read some authentic accounts of Magellan's voyage, for his narration inaccurate up to the landing in Homonhon. He spells it Homono as dos Figafetta. After that, Colin's account becomes vague. He abruptly brings Magellan to the Butuan without explaining how he gets there. Then he brings him to Limasawa, which he misspells Limasawu. And from 3, the account becomes again accurate and detailed. The important thing in Colin's account, as far as our present purpose is concerned, it is the fact that he presents the first Mass, as well as the solemn planting of the cross and the formal taking possession of the islands in the name of the Crown of Castile, as having taken place at the Butuan on Easter Sunday of 1521. So in addition, for the 3 centuries since the 17th to 19th century, it was accepted that the first Mass was held and asserted that Magellan went to Butuan, and there he celebrated the first Mass and erected a cross. And to support this, Antonio Pigafetta testified that he gave a gift of certain things to the Queen Mothers of France. So Louise of Savoy and the mother of Francis I, Gian Battista Ramosio, mentioned that a copy of Pigafetta's account was given to Louise of Savoy, whereas the manuscript was transferred to French by Jacques Fabre and imprinted by Simon de Collins. Then it was translated back into an Italian version by Ramosio, and it was basis of Colin's account. Thus, on the other way around, Colin's account was considered reliable, and there was a monument erected during the 1872 to commemorate the first Mass in Butuan on April 8, 1521. For a reason, we claim that the first Mass happened in Butuan. Combs' account: Magellan landed at Butuan, planted a cross in a solemn ceremony. There was no mention of the first Mass, but the other 2 events in Pigafetta's account were mentioned. It is planting of the cross and the formal claiming of archipelago. So at the end of 3 months and 12 days, during which they traversed 4,000 leagues, having crossed the equator a second time, they climbed up to 15 degrees north latitude, where they came upon 2 islands which they named Las Velas, or the Sails. At 12 degrees north, they came upon the Landrones Islands. A few days later, they saw the island of Ibabaw, somewhere in this archipelago. But the first island they touched, it was at Humunu, a small inhabited island near Guian Point. To that and the other islets they gave the name of Buenas Cenas, or good omens. But to the entire archipelago they gave the name San Lazaro, being the Saturday of the Saint Lazarus. Sunday in the length of year 1521. On Easter Day, in this territory of Butuan, the first Mass ever offered in this part was celebrated and a cross planted. Magellan then took formal possession of the islands in the name of Emperor of the Crown of Castile. The man who gave the most signal service to our men was the chief of Dimasaus, relative of chief of Butuan and of that of Cebu, whither he led the armads which they entered the harbor at noon on the 7th of April, the octave of Easter. So Cullen and Combs gave different accounts of the route taken by Magellan, but they asserted that Magellan landed in Butuan and there planted the cross in a solemn ceremony. Both Cullen and Combs pictured Magellan as visiting both Butuan and Limasawa. Both Cullen and Combs agreed that it was from Limasawa, with the help of Limasawa's chieftain, that the Magellan expedition went to Cebu. Magellan arrived in Cebu on April 7, 1521, 1 week after the first Mass. In the 19th century, the Butuan tradition was taken for granted and is mentioned by writer after writer, each copying from the previous one and being in turn copied by those who came after.
The evidence in favor of Limasawa. The evidence of Albus book. What is Albus book? Albus book, among many records of the first circumnavigation of the globe preserved in Spain, is the logbook kept by the pilot who brought the Victoria home under the command of Sebastian de Elcano. This pilot name was Francisco Albo. The evidence of Figafita and the summary of evidence of Albo and Figafita. The evidence of Albo's logbook. Francisco Albo joined the Magellan expedition as a pilot. In Magellan Prague ship called Trinidad, he was one of the 18 survivors who returned with Sebastian Elcano on the Victoria. After having circumnavigated the world, Albo began keeping his own diary, merely on a logbook, on the voyage out while they were sailing southward in the Atlantic along the coast of South America, of Brazil. His account of their entry into Philippine waters, as it was then called, the archipelago of San Lazaro, may reduce to the following points. On the 16th of March 1521, as they sailed in a westerly course from the Ladrones, they saw land towards the northwest, but owing to many shallows places they did not approach it. They found later that its name was Inagantu. They went instead that same day southwards to another small island named Soloan, and there they assured that they saw some canoes, but they fled at the Spaniards' approach. This island that was at 9 2/3 degrees north latitude. Departing from those two islands, they sailed westward to an uninhabited island of Gadda, where they took in a supply of wood and water. The sea around the island was free from shallows. And the confirmatory evidence from the Legazpi expedition. So, there is a confirmatory evidence from the documents of the Legazpi expedition, which sailed into Philippine waters in 1564, 44 years after Magellan. One of the places that Legazpi and his pilot were anxious to visit was precisely Masawa. From Masawa, they tend to go the Kumigawing, which was visible to Masawa, and from there they intended to go to Butuan on the island of Mindanao. The point is, as pilot of the Legazpi, Albus Logbook, Masawa lies at latitude of 9 and 2/3 degrees north in its with the located of the small island of Limasawa, south of Leyte, said island southern tip as 9054. Only the planting of the cross upon mountain top, which could be seen 3 islands to the west and southwest, was mentioned. So above this description fits Limasawa, as no island could be seen to the south and southwest of Butuan, but only towards to the north.
So this is the Philippine map. This is the southern Leyte, this part. So, and this is the Limasawa, kana akong gisirkulan, and this is the Butuan. Yan na. So, at the absolute location mentioned by Albu would fit this island. This small or tiny island, which is called Limasawa, it does not fit Butuan at all, because first and foremost of island, this is an island. But in the second description of Albu would already allow us to question the pre-Butuan account. And pre-Butuan account, these account are in favor of one as the first is the site of the first mass. So look at the second description of Albu is if you are on the hill of the tiny if you are on the hill of the tiny island in its west and southwest, sa kanyang timog at sa kanyang timog kanlurang bahagi ay makikita ang tatlong island. So in the western part in Limasawa, west is in your left part. Timanay na mao na nyo ang west kay mo na yung left part. So you will see 3 island. We have Bohol in the west, and in the southwest is the Mambagyao, and the other one is Siquijor. So this will tell us the account of Albu, the description of Albu, or his description regards the type of the first mass indeed fits that of Limasawa. Other than that, we have to study. This is an Pigafetta's account. So the testimony has regards the route taken by the expedition from the Pacific Ocean to Cebu. So meaning to say, it's really pointing out Limasawa. So if Pigafetta accounts would tell us that there is the route is from Pacific Ocean going to Cebu, then certainly magianjud niya ang Limasawa. So mao niya ang Pacific Ocean, and if the route of Magellan or Pigafetta is from Pacific Ocean going to Cebu, because they went to Cebu, they were able to visit Cebu, or that time kung makikita natin ang Limasawa, it will tell us that indeed the site of the first mass is in Leyte. Kaya mag-i-adjud nila ang Southern Leyte or Northern Leyte. So that's the description. So the Limasawa Mindanao theory, this will not fit really. So the evidence of Pigafetta's map, makit-anjud na to sa map na wala jud sila niagi sa Mindanao. And of course, the presence of 2 native kings. So the events of the 7 days at the island of Mazawa, because they stayed 7 days prior to their expedition to Cebu or Zubu. An argument from omission kasi sinasabi nila sa Butuan account na pro Limasawa,
malamang ang pangalan ng Limasawa, tapos sa pagsusulat na omit yung li, kaya tinatawag na Mazawa yung lugar. Okay, so that's the argument from omission.
Albo and Fegafetta's account. The people present during that time, Francisco Albo and Antonio Fegafetta, who provided the Limasawa evidence, were included in the 18 survivors who joined the Magellan expedition. This indicates that these two people were eyewitnesses of the mass that had happened. Besides, the evidence for Limasawa was a testimony of the two people who witnessed the event that took place and was considered as first-hand testimonies. Another thing that proved that Limasawa was the venue of the first mass is the credibility of the people who presented the evidence. Both Francisco Albo and Antonio Figapetta were competent enough to provide supporting details and proofs. They were reliable since they were present during that time and were able to see and experience the event that happened. On the other hand, when the Butuan evidence would be assessed, it can be seen that historians and map makers are only secondary sources, which were not considered as reliable as the primary source. It is uncertain where the secondary source based their statements and whether they accurately report the primary testimony as a whole. Furthermore, Limasawa evidence is authentic due to the fact that the materials used were confirmed to be part of that period. The maps, the direction, the route, the two native kings, the 7 days at Mazawa, and the argument from omission supportive the claims that the first mass happened in Limasawa and not in Butuan. In conclusion, the first mass happened in the Philippine island on March 31, 1521 at Limasawa. Due to its characteristic of being a primary source, its authenticity and its credibility, it can be assumed that Limasawa was the site of the first mass in the Philippine soil. So, the itinerary of Magellan's expedition showed that they did not go to Butuan or any other point on the Mindanao coast. The survivors of the expedition went to Mindanao later, but after Magellan's death. And then, let's move on to Legazpi expedition. So, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi was a Spanish navigator and governor who established the first Spanish settlement in the East Indies. When his expedition crossed the Pacific Ocean from the Viceroyalty of New Spain in modern-day Mexico, arriving in Cebu in the Philippine Islands in 1565. He was the first governor-general of the Spanish East Indies, which was governed and mainly located in the Philippines. Since none of the expedition after Magellan from Loaiza to Belalubos had succeeded in taking over the Philippines, King Charles I stopped sending colonizer to the islands. However, when Philip II succeeded his father to the throne in 1556, he instructed Luis de Velasco, the Viceroy of Mexico, to prepare a new expedition to be headed by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who would be accompanied by Andres de Urdaneta, a priest who had survived the Loaiza mission. On February 13, 1565, Legazpi expedition landed in Cebu Island. After a short struggle with the natives, he proceeded to Leyte, then to Camiguin, and to Bohol. There Legazpi made a blood compact with the chieftain. Dato si Katuna as a sign of friendship. Legazpi was able to obtain spice and gold in Bohol due to his friendship with si Katuna. On April 27, 1565, Legazpi returned to Cebu, destroyed the town of Raha Tupas and established a settlement. On orders of the King Philip II, 2,100 men arrived from Mexico. They built the port of Fuerza de San Pedro, which became the Spanish trading outpost and stronghold for the region. Hearing of the riches of Manila, an expedition of 300 men headed by Martin de Guete left Cebu for Manila. They found the island of Panay and Mindoro. Guete arrived in Manila on May 8, 1570. At first, they were welcomed by the natives and formed an alliance with Raja Suliman, their Muslim king, but as the locals sensed the true objectives of the Spaniards, a battle between the troops of Suliman and Spaniards erupted. Because the Spaniards are more heavily armed, the Spaniards were able to conquer Manila. Soon after, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi arrived to join Guete in Manila. Legazpi built alliances and made peace with Raja Suliman, Lacandula, and Matanda. In 1571, Legazpi ordered the construction of the whole city of Intramuros and proclaimed it as the seat of government of the colony and the capital of the island. In 1572, Legazpi died and was buried at the San Agustin Church in Intramuros. In 1574, Manila was bestowed to the title Insigne y Siempre Leal Ciudad de España, distinguished and ever loyal city of Spain, by King Philip II of Spain. So, Mazawa was conferred to be an island year Leyte and Panaon, while Butuan was on the island of Mindanao. The two were entirely different places and in no way identical.
The geography of Mazwa confirms the description of Pigafetta. The island is shaped like a tadpole, running north to south. The northern portion is almost all hills, with slopes dropping steeply to the sea, leaving only a narrow coastal strip. The southern portion of the island is almost all level land with few hills. It has a good harbor and the fields of the island are fertile. Here, the mass could have been conducted with solemnity and on one of the hills. The cross could have been planted which everyone could see from the plain. The CBCP resolution was signed by its acting president Bishop Pablo Virgilio David and Bishop Polito Cortes, who heads the Episcopal Commission for the Cultural Heritage of the Church. The NHCP has earlier determined that the 1521 First Mass took place on the island of Southern Leyte Province. The NHCP adopted the recommendation of the panel led by historian and national artist for literature Riselmo Harris that Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan and his Spanish contingent held the Mass in Limasawa. The NHCP reopened the investigation into the issue in 2018 after receiving the request from various groups to resolve the controversy and named the site the first recorded Easter Mass of March 31, 1521.
Ramusyo and the centuries-old Butuan tradition. Among pro-Butuan set of evidence that the panel examines were the numerous accounts written by a non-eyewitness decades after the 12-21 Easter Sunday Mass. So, ang giingon diri kay naay mga hukbong sa ebidensya nga gisusi, pero wala kayo nakasaksi paguman sa 15 Mass. Ug mao ni siya ang mga example. Number 1, 1581, Edict of Bishop Domingo Salazar, The Annales Ecclesiasticos de Filipina, 1574 to 1683. Number 2, 1886, Breve Resina de Diocese de Cebu. And 3, Father Francisco Collins, Labor Evangelica, Ministerios Apostolicos de los Obreros de la Campana de Jesus, 1663. Number 4, Father Francisco Combes, Historia de Mindanao, A. Holo, 1667. Number 5, Fray Gaspar de San Agusteris, Conquistas de las Islas Filipinas, 1698. The 1872 Monument in Magallanes, Agusan del Norte. Number 7 is other accounts written by the American authors in the early part of the 20th century.
Ramusio in the centuries-old Butuan tradition. The historiography of the Butuan tradition was carefully analyzed by Miguel Bernard in his article in Kinaadman entitled Butuan or Limasawa, the site of the first mass in the Philippines, a re-examination of the evidence, and by William Henry Scott in an article in the same journal entitled Why Then the Butuan Tradition. Kani si Miguel Bernard ang iyong article mao ang Butuan Limasawa and the site of the first mass in the Philippines, a re-examination of the evidences, while kang William Henry Scott sa article entitled sa iyang journal Why Then the Butuan Tradition. So, the tradition was the result of the reliance of early historians on Gian Bautista Ramosio 3-volume Del Navigation et Viagi 1550 and Maximilianus Transylvanus de Molossis in Solis. Number 2, Ramosio and Transylvanus reunited the voyage of Magellan expedition based on the accounts of the survivor. Kaning giasoy nila ni Ramosio Transylvanus ang ekspedisyon ni Magellan o sa mga asoy sa mga naluwas, mga na-survive base sa katong account. Number 3 kay it became the most dominant and authoritative source of information and were used as basis of recounting some events connected to the first circumnavigation of the world like the first mass in the Philippines. So, nahimo kani nga labing dominante sa autoritibo yung impormasyon nga gigamit og ilang gibasihan sa pipila ka mga hitabo nga konektado sa unang panahon ug sa kalibutan like sa first mass in the Philippines. Number 4, Scott agreed with the historian Mauro Garcia that Ramosio's work was a garbled and mutilated summary and Pigafetta's original account. It was Ramosio, according to Scott, who mentioned Butuan as the site of the first mass, which was picked by succeeding authors and became the long-standing tradition.
The next is Pigafetta Limasawa tradition. Pigafetta later composed a more comprehensive version of the voyage, but it remained unknown to many scholars until Carlo Amoretti published it in 1800. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera and Pablo Castella S.G. were the first two scholars who revisited the 1521 Easter Sunday Mass using the latest and more comprehensive amount of Pigafetta that became available during their time. So, katong 1521, may duha ka scholars na ilang gi-revisited ang Easter Sunday Mass using kanang the the latest and more comprehensive account of Pigafetta. So that time it became available. So number 1, Pedro Tevera wrote in El Comercio on 13 March 13, 1895. He stated that the Botoan tradition was a mistake. So Pardo de Tavera wrote siya og El Camarillo on March 31, and ang nakasulat dato kay ang Batuan ko tradition kay mistake ra daw. And then number 2, Pastels on his part made a similar remark questioning the veracity of the Batuan claim on the 1521 Easter Sunday Mass. While working on his tradition of Collins' labor of Evangelica, he had the opportunity to study Pigafetta and Albo on his footnote on Collins' account of the first Mass. Pastel wrote, Magellan did not go to Butuan, rather from the island of Limasawa, and he proceeded to Cebu. Robertson published a translation of Pigafetta manuscript in 1906 using the Aberciana Codex. So what is Aberciana Codex? So Aberciana Codex is a codices Aberciana A to E are 5 biblical manuscripts dating the 6th and 11th century CE, now in the Biblioteca Aberciana in Milan. They are written by different hands and different alphabets. He wrote that according to Pigafetta, the 1521 Easter Sunday was held in an island called Mazawa. Robertson provided a footnote that the present name of the place is Limasawa. In 1969, Skelton also came with an English translation of the Nancy Codex and noted that the Mass took place in an island which Pigafetta called Mazawa. He also identified Limasawa as its current name. Padre Tavera correction for the Masta transception, Pastel's footnote on Colin, Robertson's translation of the Marcia Codex, and Skelton's translation of Nancy Codex may be considered the main reason for the shift in scholarly opinion regarding the sites of 1521 Easter Sunday Mass.
Other issues: intentionally concealed Aberciana versus Nancy Codex, reading the coordinates, geomorphic changes, Butuan as a pre-colonial trading center, Limasawa had no provision and spices. So, National Historical Institute and National Historical Commission of the Philippines studied the case of the first Mass in year 1980, 1995, 2008, and 2018. They always affirmed that the site of the first Mass in Limasawa, Southern Leyte. When the pro-Butuan tried to repeal the Republic Act 2733, the panel disregarded them with the reason that the evidence pro-Butuan presented was not convincing enough to prove that the Mass takes place in their land. Pro-Limasawa provided panel coordinates said to be from eyewitnesses, studies and projects using modern navigational instruments and copies of Pigafetta's original account. Pro-Limasawa claims that the translation made by James Alexander Robertson and Emma Helen Blair from Pigafetta's Italian manuscript, Ambrosia Codex, kept in Milan, Italy, was the original and is described as a workmanlike better than elegant. They used Robertson's translation to prove that Limasawa is the place where the first Mass was held. Then, Limasawa Island, Southern Leyte, be sustained as the site of the 1521 Easter Sunday Mass. So, this topic is already tackled to my group mates. So, about where do happen the first mass in the Philippines. So if you need more further information, we provided a references or link, then you can click it so that you can read all about the site of first mass in the Philippines. So that's all.